Thanks for joining us. This is a next step class. This class is designed to help you take the next step. And the very first thing you need to do is simply know where we've come from so that you can take the next step. So let me tell you the story of Gold Creek. In 1992, my wife and my family moved into this beautiful area that we had chosen. We had a chance to choose anywhere we wanted to plant a church, and we believed that God wanted us to plant a church right here in Seattle, not just anywhere in Seattle, but a little bit east of the city of Mill Creek, in a little subdivision called the Falls. And I moved into this little house, and we began to trust that God would help us build a church. Now it's perfect that this is a rainy day because it kind of describes the story and the highs and lows. And this is my journal that I wrote in. Every time I had a really high point, I would write, and every time I had a really low point, I'd write. And I had a really low point in December 14th, 1992. I began to write down my feelings because for months and months I'd been trying to build a core team of people. And here it was December, and I was just 3 or 4 months away from starting a church in Easter. And I write this: I'm not enthusiastic at all. I realize that this is going to be a problem. I've been putting out flyers, and I'm full of fear of rejection. I'm afraid we're not going to have success. I'm simply afraid. As you can tell, I'm really not doing very well today. And your strength is my refuge, is what I wrote in here. Now, what's interesting is that was a low point, but wasn't my lowest point. My lowest point came at the end of the month when I finally had 10 couples that had committed to be a part of our church plant. And as we got together, we began to dream and think about the church plant. And so we had a big New Year's Eve party. My wife and I decorated our home. We bought all kinds of food. We did all kinds of things to get ready for this New Year's Eve party. And we invited all of our core couples to come. And we were so excited. We were thinking about starting the new year because this was the year we would start the church. And no one came. It was the biggest moment of failure in my life. All of my plans and all of my efforts and all the work had completely failed. My wife and I went to bed that night completely crying, feeling like that we had no chance whatsoever. I wrote in my journal, January 6, 1993, I'm dealing with waves of depression, Lord. I don't have much hope of starting a church. I'm beginning to deal with failure, and failure is still my greatest fear. I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid to quit. I hate quitters. I barely started, and I already feel like a failure. And then I wrote this verse down. Don't be anxious for anything. Pray about everything. Rejoice. Again, I say rejoice. I was reminded that day how much I needed God's help. And so I set a plan of something that I did not want to do. On a rainy day like this, I decided that I would go up one side of my street and down the other side of my street and call on 10 homes. And it was rainy and it was cold and I didn't think anyone would be home. And I went and I would knock on the doors and I would stand with my back to the door and I would pretend that I was not a salesman and I would invite them to a Bible study. And I had zero faith that there was going to be anybody that came. But I want to read you the next. This is January 12th, 1993. Lord, I'm thankful for your help today. I have been so afraid of failure, and today I'm full of hope. I can see a little more clearly what you want to do. And I report in here that I had 13 adults and 15 kids. So what happened in that little Bible study that we had that first night was we invited 13 adults into the living room. I took the adults in the living room. My wife took the kids in the other room, and I held a Bible study, which wasn't really a Bible study because it was an atheist, a Jewish person, a Jewish couple, a nominal Christian, an alcoholic. I mean, this was going to be the core group that started the church. And this little group of people got together and we spent the whole night debating whether or not there really was a God. That's really all we talked about. But I had a little bit of hope because these people came to my house to do a Bible study. And somehow, I think they just felt sorry for me. They decided to help me start a church. And I write here at the end of the month, I write a couple things. I say this: I know your hand is at work, Lord. I can see now your plan. I'm trying to ask you, Lord, help us to have 200, and I'm asking for core families to have like minds. You're giving me peace today. I'm excited to report that you're helping me today. I wrote in here March 17th, 1993, another entry in my diary. This was another low point for me. This is the lowest I've been in my life. I'm 4 weeks away from starting the church. I used to have hope, but I don't have hope anymore. I have no music, no one to lead the music, no children's workers, no solid couples to help me lead. It looks like the future, it looks like failure is imminent. And as you can tell, I'm not doing that good, is what I wrote. And then I wrote this scripture in here. Trials develop perseverance. James 1, trials develop perseverance. Lord, make me complete. Help me to persevere. And it was in that moment that I began to trust God with my future and trust God. And just a few weeks later, with God's help, we collected as many people as we could to help us. And on that Sunday, we had 275 people show up. And from that moment on, I just believe somehow that God had his hand in the beginning of Gold Creek at this little school called Totem Falls School. We thought about calling the church the Falls, but we didn't figure that's a good name for a church. So we decided we'd go after a subdivision called Gold Creek, and so we called it Gold Creek. I write in here on April 3rd, 1994. It's over a year since I wrote in here. The excitement of our first Sunday with 275 was more than I can handle. I can't describe the highs and lows in the pages before this. I've forgotten how you provided music, children, all that I needed. Right now, though, today, I need another miracle. And I begin to go on and write about those miracles. And really, what this represents for me is that year after year, God's provided miracles. God's done things that I can't even begin to tell you. The highs and the lows and the people. There's a date in here where I talk about how God has given me good staff and how God's providing for me. And there's different times when staff have left, and I wrote down my feelings and all this, and then I write a high point where God's given us an incredible high point, and then it's followed by a low point where we had no money and I was going without salary, and then at this point in 1998 I talk about this incredible Easter service we had and what was happening, and then in May of 1998 I wrote about a very traumatic thing that happened for us as a family, but it was also, I think, somewhat traumatic for the church. Is my son and I had difficulty, and there was a time when he eventually ran away, and our family was broken, and we were deeply hurt. And I write in here, Daniel has just graduated, and I'm not proud of him. In fact, I'm very angry with him. And I write in here some pretty hard things about those times of our family. And it's in the midst of that I still try and lead the church as best I know how. And those highs, I get to the end of this and I write, Lord, he's yours. And I'm going to do my best to let go of my feelings today. I'm giving him to you. I've failed. He's your boy. Forgive me. Help me with Kristen, which is my daughter. But I want to show you something else, because this is a letter that my son gave me, which is a resolve to this moment, because my son came back to our church years later after becoming a minister. The Lord has a sense of humor, and he writes me this incredible letter, and he reads it to the church, and it's a letter of forgiveness. asking my forgiveness. And he read this in an incredible way to his church down in Vancouver at the time. And then he came back and he read it to our church. And it brought so much meaning and forgiveness and freedom in my life. And even as I look through all this, there's all of these journeys. We come right now to today. We've become the church, what I call the God Can Church, where all of a sudden we realize that God can do what He can only do in our lives, in the lives of people. And what we do is invite people in so that God can do what He can do. Here's the great thing about our church. This is really just the beginning points of our church, but our church has a history that goes on and on. Right now, God is doing things that only God can do. We're becoming the God Can Church. And as we do that, we recognize that He's multiplying our campuses. We never dreamed that we would have such a huge influence. But what used to be 100 a year growth has been exponentially greater. The growth that's happening at each of our campuses are amazing. And what I want you to do, if you're sitting in a meeting at a campus, I want you to hear from your campus pastor the story of their beginnings. It's a good chance for you to hear how God's miracles happen time and time again, even at your campus.
I want to introduce myself. My name's Brian. I'm the campus pastor here at our Woodinville location for Gold Creek. And I want to tell you a little bit of history about how we got started. And really it starts back with my story. I went to Gold Creek as a high school student where I got saved at a high school camp back in 2001. And that started a progression of kind of a snowball where I went to college, went to Bible college, got my degree in theology, and came back here. I was able to get hired at the church where I got saved some years before. I was the youth pastor here at Gold Creek when we were just a single location. I was there for 7 years doing youth ministry, and the Woodinville campus was actually the first campus to launch, which is now Gold Creek, which is soon to be 5 campuses. But for us, it started a little bit, we were kind of vagabonds. We didn't know what we were doing. I asked 8 couples to come with me to start this campus. This was 3 years ago. And I kind of searched. And for me, I've always been a non-traditional guy, and I wanted to do church in a non-traditional place. And so we began to search, and every day our staff would ask if I found our spot, and I would kind of drive around praying and looking. And it wasn't until one day where one of the pastors suggested as a joke, kind of joking around, that I go to the sewage plant over in Woodinville because they were doing wedding rentals there. And we all had a big laugh, and I said, shoot, I haven't found anything else, so I'm gonna go look at it. So I started driving around, and I went there, and I walked into Brightwater, and I was like, this is it. This is the place where we're gonna start our church. And we started down that process. We had our first service in September where we launched, and we had a small group of people who came with us from Mill Creek, as well as some people that we had made connections with at Woodinville, and that started this process of Gold Creek Woodinville. Now, it seems so simple and so quick to tell that story, but I'll tell you, it was the most stressful, faith-stretching experience for me and for the families who went with me, because we were starting something from nothing. We really didn't have directions on how to do it, but we just believed that God had put this dream on our hearts to reach a new part of Washington, and Woodinville ended up being the place. And now, looking back for myself, man, God's done so much amazing things in these 3 years. Now, where I'm standing and we're filming is we're in our new property. We own a piece of property right on Highway 9 and Maltby Road, which is one of the busiest corners leading into Woodinville. And this was the impossible solution that we had, that we were gonna try and find a piece of property in an area that was booming, getting more and more expensive to buy property. And then of all the places, this was a non-traditional place, a place that for literally 100 years it was homesteaded here, to now to the place and the time where it was just a couple random businesses. And we prayed and we believed, and we went into this negotiation, and it was gonna be impossible. Too much money and not enough things going our way. But yet here we stand today that we have purchased this property. We've remodeled this building. we're remodeling the next building, believing that God is going to be doing something pretty cool here in the coming years. And what we hope to do is, we're in the process right now of submitting our permits for a big building in the back corner of this property. That's where we hope to land and put down roots as a church. But what I love about Woodinville and who we are and what God's done in these 3 short years is that we could be anywhere. The great thing about being a church in a truck, whether that's good or bad, is that we can do church anywhere, whether it's on this property or Brightwater or at another location. God is moving, and God's been a part of the great times in our lives and the failures in our lives. But what I know about God is that He's going to continue to be in our lives, reaching Woodinville, whether it's here or somewhere else. I hope that you can join the journey with us. The cool thing is you don't have to be special. You don't have to have your ducks in a row. We were kind of just a mixed mash of people that came over here 3 years ago and started. And now look what God has done in 3 short years. I'm pretty excited to know about our future and what God plans to do for us and hopefully with you too.